So look, in 10 minutes, all I can really do is tell a story, frame a picture, weave a web, capturing the challenges and the massive opportunities that lawyers for net zero have, and the general counsels backing it, and what you face in the coming decade and beyond. And I'm not going to talk about Shell. I'm not going to talk about Engine One. I'm not going to talk about Exxon. I'm going to take you a little bit through a personal voyage in terms of my 30-year interface in sustainability, climate change, and trying to mobilize capital markets towards that. And I'm going to come at it from initially 100,000 feet. And also at the same time, I'm going to simply, in a Formula One style, just capture some moments from my own career, which I think are relevant and context setting, and importantly, give signals and signposts for the challenges that lawyers for net zero and general counsels have in coming years. So you'll forgive me for starting on my own journey, but here we go. Look, so snapshots in terms of how we got here, how we got to COP26, how we got to ESG, how we got to $120 trillion supposedly backing the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment. So I go back to Madrid, 1991. I'm a journalist. I'm sitting in a sealed telephone booth, reporting and filing copy on the imminent failure and collapse of the Antarctic environmental protection regime. In one of those golden journalistic moments, a hole in my telephone booth let me hear what the head of the US delegation was saying. He was pleading with John Sununu, the then head of the first President Bush's White House, to sign the Antarctic environmental protection regime. And not leave the US as one of only 39 nations who would become the dirty man of Antarctica. Sununu won, they didn't sign it, the Antarctic environmental protection regime collapsed. The energy lobbyists won on that occasion, not a question. Let's move on. That's one example. Fast forward to Buenos Aires, UNFCCC COP4. I'm a survivor of 14 COPs, including Paris. But way back in '98, we kicked off something called the International Emissions Trading Association. My key question at launch, no one from finance is in the room. There are no bankers, there's no financiers, nobody is in the room. Only a couple of loan insurers. Why were we there? Why? Why was no one there from the finance sector? Again, another snapshot moving forward quickly. UNHQ, New York, in the atmospheric ECOSOC chamber, that's Economic and Social Chamber, with Professor Paul Watchman of then Freshfields, Brookhouse and Derringer, when he launched a 150-page legal interpretation of ESG and fiduciary law in the 9 major capital market jurisdictions. A long, slow burn, but in terms of the volume of funds and the focus on ESG, 15 years on, we're seeing ESG easily mainstreamed. And the legal fraternity, not all of them, but in the last 5 years, beginning to take ESG seriously. I think in some ways because of the upsurge in terms of investment flows, but also a range of other factors. So that was 2005. New York Stock Exchange, April of 2006. So I'm on the iconic balcony of the exchange with Kofi Annan opening the US markets. On that day, at the bell ringing ceremony, we had on the balcony, we had 53 institutions or representatives thereof, and $4 trillion in capital backing ESG and Annan's principles for responsible investment, the PRI as it's now commonly known. By 2021, that figures up to 120 trillion and 4,500 institutions. Is everything solved in terms of environment and sustainability because of that? No, we'll come back to that. Fast forward again, it's a personal sort of journey I'm giving you, but in terms of an understanding that I think lawyers for net zero need in the challenges ahead. 2015, Paris, Cities Day at UNFCCC COP21, just a few days ahead of the Paris Agreement, in fact, 4 days ahead. So it was a tough gig. I was launching the UN Secretary General's Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, but I was squeezed between 2 political rock stars, the then governor of California, Jerry Brown, and his immediate predecessor, Arnold Schwarzenegger. they got all the camera flashes and questions. So what's my key point here? In the business of climate, in the politics of climate, in the policy and the regulatory affairs of climate, there are no easy wins. We are talking about a transition where there's huge embedded 250-year-old invested interests to what needs to be a completely different approach. We're using the term energy transition and the transition to sustainability. Again, there are no easy wins. I think for Lawyers for Net Zero, your first challenge out of the gate, Adam and the general counsels here, is to protect and build the momentum around net zero. It's no news to any general counsel that we have a current ESG bubble, a tsunami of greenwash and uncertainty over carbon markets. And the gap between sovereign and corporate climate pledges and impact, that net zero itself is already under a forensic microscope. As Lawyers for Net Zero, you already have a political policy and technical battle on your hands on this, your launch day. So for the initiatives to gain traction, have global impact and change the climate debate while accelerating the sustainability and energy transition, you have huge obstacles, and yet the wind is filling your sails for those businesses who are early movers on real net zero. Why? For several reasons. Let's start with the future clients for all of your brands, whether consumers, business, or industrial. Anyone born in 2000 already has faced two distinct systemic failures, with the mother of all systemic failures evolving behind that. So now, in their 21st year, someone born in 2000, they've already experienced at the age of 7 or 8 the global financial crisis. More than likely, they were unaware of the impact of the crash on their economic prospects, but today, many have some feeling for that. In the 21st year, the current COVID-19 pandemic unfolds with close to 4 million global deaths and accompanied by social and economic mayhem. I don't need to go into any details, we're living it. The backdrop to all of this is the uncertain and unpredictable volatility of global warming, impacts and ecosystems collapse, the mother of all systemic failures, as I call it. In 1954, the Canadian economist J.K. Galbraith wrote in his foreword when commenting on the causes and impacts of the financial crash, ordinary people know when they have been rimmed. He used the word rimmed. Galbraith was also known for his fruity, if not lewd use of language in private correspondence, but he got his point across. Back to our 21-year-olds. In this decade, as they grow towards their 30s, whether as members of Extinction Rebellion or the local tennis club or both, every indicator tells us that societal trust in many institutions, including big business, has been defenestrated. Whether climate, ecosystems, destruction, diversity, human rights, issues in the supply chain, social injustice, no large branded global business can afford to do anything but be authentic. By the decade's end, sooner perhaps, I think authenticity will trump accountability and transparency as the aspirant go-to for corporate DNA. Can you and how do you embed authenticity in corporate culture? I believe this is a key role for General Counsel, and by stepping up to join Lawyers for Net Zero, it's a significant step. If you own it, if net zero is real, if you help define it. Moving on, for some, net zero is already not enough, however. The clamor for corporate leaders to pledge regenerative climate action, going beyond net zero and paying back legacy carbon debts will grow. Climate will increasingly become the lightning rod to channel political pressure on G7, G20 and OECD governments and the business who see those businesses who see the developed economies as home. From the current 46.5 degree heat dome stretching from California to the Pacific Northwest, to the year in, year out fires in California, Australia, Greece, Portugal and beyond, to species destruction, speeding fractures of the Western Antarctic ice shelf, the heat will be on our political elite to go beyond net zero. Will they yield? If Lawyers for Net Zero establish a cohesive, comprehensive and defining definition of net zero, which informs political debate, this will act to establish center ground for what is possible in the transition and protect companies from more hysterical claims and attacks. A challenge to the initiative as you launch. Could you, in 5 years' time, support net zero plus, or even net zero plus plus? to align with businesses who wish to go beyond straightforward net zero pledges and approach regenerative climate action. We're thinking about Adam and Sarah and the GCs on the panels and listening. Finally, in terms of factors working for your initiative, my experience in those 14 COPs and over the last 30 years tells me that to truly swing big changes at UNFCCC COPs, only the largest governments with effective machinery and global reach can succeed. Denmark failed at the much heralded COP15 in 2009 before it collapsed on the last night of negotiation, while Laurent Fabius and the French succeeded in Paris at COP21. So the fact we have a major political beast in the UK convening COP26 in November means that there will be political energy that lawyers for net zero can use. The French worked their diplomatic machinery for a full 2 years before COP21 and for a year afterwards to ensure a result and to maintain traction. The UK is coming off the back of a fractured global geopolitics, but I'd wager the world desperately needs a collective success at something, and the Glasgow Climate Summit could be it. So let me close my opening comments with a couple of points. I was looking for a metaphor last night for the role of general councils across different sectors in climate change. And the metaphor came through a book I'm reading, The Last Grain Race. It's from 1938. It's by Eric Newby. And he sailed around the Horn to Australia and back on a four-rigged sailing ship. The General Counsel is not the skipper. You're the first mate. As part of the chapter, he describes a storm in the Southern Oceans, unbelievable ferocity at every level, and they survived it. The General Counsel's role I see going forward is the storm is not just one of climate change, it is all the mixed systemic issues around ESG. It's the functioning and questioning of corporate behavior and the behavior of our governments. General Counsel, as the first mate, in difficult storms that will come and go, they'll be becalmed. Its role in terms of climate change is to grasp it, is to own it, is to drive it through the DNA of corporate culture. I think General Counsel sits in that both privileged and pressing position of being a light rod for the volatility we will see in politics, policy, and regulatory issues in and around climate change. Final closing thought is that net zero enough? In terms of taking that step and framing the corporate thinking and culture and thinking about it and genuinely delivering authentically on net zero, perhaps will also speed companies to the next step in terms of the transition. Sarah?